Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're
So,
good.
so Tony, let's get right to it. Tomorrow is some big time matchups in college football. At 12, we got Oklahoma and UC here at Nippert Stadium. So it's the Sooners and Bearcats. And then at 3:30, Deion Sanders and his Colorado Buffaloes are traveling to Oregon to take on the Oregon Ducks. And then in the nightcap, the game of the week, it's the Ohio State Buckeyes and Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Let's start off with the Oklahoma and UC game, Tony. What is your expectations for this matchup between Oklahoma and Cincinnati?
I expect this to be a pretty ugly game for Cincinnati. This is going to be Cincinnati's first true test coming into the Big 12 after, leaving the AC, not the AAC, the AAC, coming in their first Power 5 conference. It's going to be up against a true test in Oklahoma. And UC has looked pretty bad this year. They don't look like the UC of old. I think the Luke Fickell leaving Cincinnati, going to Wisconsin, who has honestly kind of also been a disappointment so far this year. I think Cincy is going to probably struggle quite a bit against Oklahoma. I think this will be a little bit of a bounce back game for not only Oklahoma, but also Brent Venables, because I'm not going to lie. Last year when I watched Brent Venables coach, Oklahoma started out real hot, and then they had a really, really bad losing skid there for pretty much the rest of the season and ended up going, I believe, 500, if not just under 500 for the first time in many, many years of Oklahoma football. So I see this as kind of a bounce back game. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners, has had a pretty good year. He's completing 82.5% of his passes. He's got 905 yards and 11 touchdowns to 1 interception so far this year. So he's having a really good season. Now, albeit Oklahoma hasn't really faced any true, competition. They faced Arkansas State, they faced SMU, and they just beat Tulsa. But other than that, I mean, everything right now is pointing to Oklahoma having pretty much a pretty good route over Cincinnati.
Now, Tony, Oklahoma coming into this game, they have outscored their opponents 167 to 28. And so I'm listening to Joe Klatt earlier this week, and he was talking about how Oklahoma is being undervalued, and they're one of those teams that's kind of like a sleeper team that could creep their way into the playoff conversation as the season goes along. How do you feel about Oklahoma and their chances at being able to creep their way into that conversation at being a possible playoff team at the end of the season?
I mean, I think it's possible. They're really the only competition they have to really face off with, especially in conference with the Big 12 right now, is Texas. That's really their only competition. If we look at TCU stumbled really right out of the gate, and it's pretty sad considering, just a few months ago, you and I were talking about the national title with them being in it. And they did lose a lot of players to the draft, and then they come out and they have a really good matchup with Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes, but end up, coming away short. And then, it just doesn't look like the same TCU team that had that Cinderella story run that we saw last year. So really, other than that, there's not a lot of teams that I see in the Big 12 that it's like, yeah, they're pretty much the favorites. Baylor is usually a Big 12 favorite. They're sitting at 1-2 right now. I kind of see them, probably going to be hard for them to bounce back. My other favorite, other than Texas, probably would have been Kansas State, but they ended up losing last week on a last second field goal kick to Missouri. Actually ended up knocking them out of the ranking system. So really, I do kind of agree with Joel. I think that right now Texas is really the only thing standing between Oklahoma and a potential, college football playoff spot.
Now, the Bearcats are fresh off a bad loss to the Miami, Ohio Redhawks last week at Nippert Stadium, Tony. And they have the new head coach, Scott Satterfield. He replaced Luke Fickell from last year. And Bearcat fans, they were upset with Scott Satterfield last week after that loss to the Miami Redhawks. So what is your expectations in this matchup for the Bearcats, considering this is their first Big 12 matchup, and the team that they're going to be going up against is the Oklahoma Sooners, and they've outscored their opponents 167 to 28. So do you expect the Bearcats, my Bearcats, because I'm here in Cincinnati, do you expect my Bearcats, Tony, to at least be competitive in this game? Because right now the spread is Sooners minus 14. So Vegas is saying it's going to be a blowout. Do you expect the Bearcats to at least keep it close?
I'm gonna be honest with you, man. I know you're living in Cincinnati, and I know you're a Bearcats fan. I don't honestly see it happening, and I only say that because you look at the history of Oklahoma, you look at how big of a football brand Oklahoma has been over the last, 10, 15 plus years, even with Lincoln Riley and Bob Stoops both gone. Oklahoma is still a big coaching, is still a big targeted area to go to. And now, especially with them going to the SEC, even more, 3, 4, and 5-star recruits are going to want to go to Oklahoma to potentially go into a pipeline that is the NFL.
Yeah.
So with Cincinnati, with them being brand new into, now being a Power 5 school, once again, they lost a lot of really good talent from that, that 13-0 team just a couple years ago. So to me, I think it's going to take a couple years for Cincinnati to kind of prove, okay, hey, we are a Power 5 school. You can come here. We're going to face quality talent now in the soon-to-be new Big 12 with all the addition of the Pac-12 teams that are going to be joining. I think it's going to be a little bit before I could say Cincinnati is going to be, one of those schools that they may not be always in the college football playoff contention, conversation, but they're going to be, I think, pretty good contenders and being able to compete with probably the best of them.
Now, Deion Sanders, Colorado Buffaloes are 3-0. They're traveling to Oregon to take on the 3-0 Oregon Ducks. Colorado has scored 35 points per game in each of their first 3 games of the season, the first time since 1995, Tony. And Shedeur Sanders, 10 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1,251 passing yards, completing 79% of his passes. He's going to be without all-star receiver Travis Hunter, but he still got solid skill position players like Jimmy Horn and Xavier Weaver. I look at this as a moment for Shedeur Sanders, Tony, to prove that he is one of the top quarterbacks in the nation and elevate himself into that Heisman conversation and be secure. What do you believe is going to be important for Sanders and the Buffaloes offensively come Saturday afternoon in Oregon? What's the most important factor for them?
I think for them is that offensive line play. And I say that because we watched Colorado State. For Colorado State kind of coming out of nowhere, I think most everybody, I don't know about you, but most everybody, and myself included, expected Colorado State to get completely blown out by Colorado. And that ended up not being the case at all. And if you look at Colorado as a whole is a pretty small offensive line and pretty small defensive line. So Colorado State was able to push through relatively easy, which does work out in Shedeur's favor because Shedeur is a pretty mobile quarterback. And I mean, for anybody that, if you're a Colorado hater or not, Shedeur Sanders is super entertaining to watch because you'll watch him roll out. He extends the play and it's just super entertaining. But that's going to be the big thing is can they keep Shedeur upright? Because if you watch that Colorado State game, they were hitting him just as hard as they were hitting Travis Hunter. They were hitting everybody extremely hard. So the big thing is going to be keeping him upright because Travis Hunter went out pretty early in the game and they were down 14-7 if I remember correctly at that point.
Yeah.
So they like you said, they do have the skill positions. They have the talent to win. It's keeping Shedeur upright, and as long as they can at least stay competitive, I think like most college teams, if they go down by 3 scores and it's about middle of the third quarter, I don't know if they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be built to kind of be able to bounce back and be able to come back. So as long as they keep him upright and they at least keep it closely competitive, I think this will be a pretty good challenge for Colorado.
Now, in the backfield, the Buffaloes have Dylan Edwards. Obviously, again, they're skill position players, even besides Travis Hunter. They got Xavier Weaver. They got Jimmy Horn. I saw Michael Harrison, the tight end for the Buffaloes, last week against Colorado State, Tony. He had a breakout performance, 7 receptions, 76 receiving yards, had 2 touchdowns. Who do you believe is going to be the X factor offensively and kind of like that go-to player on the offensive side of the ball for Sanders without Travis Hunter? Yeah.
I think it is going to be Edwards, and I think it's going to be Henderson both. Like you said, Henderson kind of came out of the blue. If you notice, he's a really big body, and they were using him really well over the middle of the field, and especially in the red zone. I kind of see him becoming, Shedeur Sanders' new favorite target in the red zone since Travis Hunter is gone. I definitely see that happening. I also expect on the other side of the ball, on the defense, I expect Shiloh Sanders, Deion's other son, to also, step up. We saw him actually get the pick 6 against Colorado State last week. So I think now that Travis Hunter's going to be out, Shiloh's going to probably be moved to the number one quarterback position. So I expect him to also have a big game, also step it up. And honestly, I don't know how you felt about it, but the first couple of games, we didn't really hear Shiloh's name much. We heard Shedeur, we heard Travis Hunter, but we don't really get to hear Shiloh's name as much as we hear the other two. So I feel like he's kind of I don't want to say forgotten, but he's kind of left by the wayside while the other two kind of are able to take the limelight. So I see him stepping up and having a pretty good game for the Buffaloes as well.
Now, the Oregon Ducks are coached by Dan Lanning. The Oregon Ducks are they are 3-0 on the season. They've outscored their opponents so far this season, 174-47, averaging 58 points per game, Tony. But in those 3 games, they went up against Portland State, Texas Tech, and Hawaii. So what do you make of Dan Lanning's football team so far? They're led by, obviously, quarterback Bo Nix. It seems like he's been in college forever. He's 23 years old. He's been in college forever, Tony. What are your expectations for this Oregon Ducks offense Saturday afternoon against Colorado?
Some people might be a little surprised. I expect them to struggle a little bit. And I say that because of who you pointed out. They faced Portland State. They dropped 81 on them with relatively no issue whatsoever. They just dropped over 55 on Hawaii. Now, if you notice that game in the middle there where they've allowed most of their points, they really struggled hard against a Texas Tech team that a lot of people kind of had pretty high up on their radar as far as doing really well in the Big 12. And they've underperformed. But you look at how much Texas Tech took them down to the wire as far as making Oregon really struggle that whole entire game and make Oregon really claw its way back. So to me, I think this is Oregon's second true competition of like actual, Power 5 talent. Because whenever you face the Portland States, whenever you face the Hawaiis, all of these Group 5 schools, you kind of expect to be able to blow them out pretty easily, which is what Oregon did with no problem. But when they faced a true Power 5 school that has the talent, that has the recruiting ability that not only Texas Tech does, but as we've seen with Prime, he's got all the recruitment capabilities, he's got all the spotlight capabilities in the world, and he's brought great players to Colorado. I mean, I don't think anybody expected Colorado to be 3-0 at this point, to be ranked 18th in the nation, going up against number 10 Oregon. So I think this will be a true test for them, and I think this will be a little bit of a reality shock for them that, hey, we might need to take this a little bit seriously if we expect to try to make a deep run into the playoffs, especially as they're going to have to come up, eventually against USC as well, which is going to be their biggest hurdle in the pack.
Now, Bo Nix for the season, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 893 passing yards, completing 78% of his passes, Tony. He's going up against the opposing quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. Again, 10 touchdowns, 1 interception, over 1,200 passing yards, completing 79% of his passes. Who do you believe has the advantage from a quarterback standpoint? Is it Colorado with Sanders or Oregon with Nix?
I think it's Shedeur. I think Shedeur, because of his mobility, because he's able to not only roll out of the pocket but still extend the play by throwing it as well. I've watched Bo Nix when he was at Auburn. Bo Nix is a very athletic quarterback. I'm not going to take that away from him. Last year he had a fantastic year. I know a lot of people this year had Bo Nix as a potential dark horse, as a potential Heisman candidate.
Yeah.
But Bo is the type of guy, he's either going to throw it or he's going to run it. There's, he's not really a kind of in the middle kind of guy. Whereas you watch Shedeur will make it look like he's going to run, and then he'll end up throwing it to extend the play and of course move the chains pretty well. So to me, I give it to Shedeur, not only because of just pure athleticism, but his ability to extend the plays and do it in a very smart way that's not putting the ball at risk. Because like you said, Shedeur only has 1 interception so far to 10 touchdowns. So it shows he takes care of the ball extremely well.
Now, Oregon has a dynamic duo at running back, Tony. They have Bucky Irving and Jordan James, both dynamic running backs for the season. Irving, 27 carries, over 200 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. James, 21 carries, over 150 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns. So defensively, Colorado has struggled against the run. They give up almost 5 yards per carry. So do you believe it's going to be in Oregon's best interest to run the football and kind of actually slow the game down Saturday afternoon in Oregon? Do you think that's going to be the best, way for success for Oregon in this game?
I think so. I think if Oregon is potentially worried about, Colorado's secondary potentially picking off Bo Nix or making Bo Nix struggle quite a bit, or if maybe they're trying to play it a little bit smart and not pick on that secondary since Travis Hunter isn't there, play to your strengths, run the ball against, like I said with Colorado, they're a good team, but overall they're very small. You look at that defensive pass rush. Yes, they can get to the quarterback. They kind of remind me of a very old school Philadelphia Eagles defense. Like I don't know if you remember like 2009 to 2011, they weren't real big dudes. They were real small and they were real fast.
Yeah.
But when you have big offensive linemen like you have for Oregon, that's hard to be able to get through. So if you're able to run the ball, and what's the best thing that everybody says to, win a game, whether it's in college or professional football, keep your opponent from being able to get his hands on the ball. Best way to beat Patrick Mahomes, keep him on the sideline. Same with Tom Brady. So if they can continue to run the ball and keep Shador on the other side, it makes it that much easier for them to be able to not only get a lead, but also maintain and keep that lead and just milk the clock down.
Yeah, because I kind of feel like, Tony, Oregon, as crazy as it sounds, they don't want to get into a track meet with Colorado. Like I think that's kind of playing into Colorado's hands. If you have this game in the 40s and the 50s, these are the kind of games that Colorado has shown an ability that they can win. Week 3, they beat Colorado State, putting up 43 points. And then in week 1, obviously, they beat TCU, putting up 45 points. So I think it's going to be in Oregon's best interest to kind of slow the game down and run the football, because I think when you get into a track meet with the Buffaloes, they have proven that they can win those type of games for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a mixture of not only Shador, but also Dion, being able to rally the troops. Like, look, you're this close. Like, we're able to go blow for blow with them. All we got to do is get one stop. All we got to do is, get one score to at least keep us in it. And yeah, they, like you said, they kept that up with TCU. They kept it up with Colorado State. I would hope that Oregon doesn't make that same mistake. Otherwise, we might see Colorado, jump up even farther, and the Oregon Ducks take their first loss of the season.
For sure, for sure. He's a college football analyst and owner of the Inside the Hoosier Mind podcast. He is Tony Hollands. So, Tony, let's transition. Let's talk about the primetime matchup Saturday night in Notre Dame. We got the number 6 Ohio State Buckeyes in Notre Dame to take on the Fighting Irish, the number 9 team in the country. So when it comes to the Ohio State Buckeyes, Tony, their quarterback is Kyle McCord. And so far for the season, Kyle has 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, 815 passing yards, completing 70% of his passes. But Buckeye fans, they don't really believe in McCord. And I've heard fans talk about, man, they got a problem at quarterback. What's your biggest takeaway on McCord's performances in the first 3 weeks of the season?
I think it is pretty underwhelming, but I kind of also look at this as, and you might agree with me, because when I lived in Dayton, Ohio, I heard about this a lot as well. You go from having, the JT Barretts to the Dwayne Haskins to the Justin Fields to the CJ Strouds. Those were all great quarterbacks for Ohio State. And then you get, a kid like Kyle McCord, who comes in. He's been in the system for a couple years now, and he does struggle a little bit. And I equate that to not only the offensive line being a little rusty. The talent, I don't think, is as good as it was last year with their offensive line. And I've noticed with Ohio State, they're not running the ball like they were before. CJ Stroud and Justin Fields could get you the ball, could move the chains, not only throwing it but also running it. But Travion Henderson has not been nearly as good or nearly as productive as I kind of expected him to be coming into this season. And I've noticed that the last 2 years. His freshman year, he kind of burst onto the scene. If I remember right, he was having to share the field with J.K. Dobbins. And then now it's like, his production has kind of fallen off. And I don't know if that's also equated to the offensive line. I've noticed he likes to try to go outside of the tackles instead of trying to run in, which is where I think their strength would be a little bit more if he tried to run inside as opposed to trying to do like a halfback stretch on the outside. So I kind of equate it to him to that. He doesn't really have a good running game to rely on. And I do think a little bit of it is also chemistry. I know he played with Marvin Harrison Jr. Back in high school, so he does have a little bit of that connection, but he still needs to have that connection with Emmanuel Ibuka and Emeka Ibuka, my apologies, and the tight end number 8. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. So also Ryan Day, Tony, obviously, so far since he's been at Ohio State, he has not beaten Michigan. And last year in the playoff matchup, they did play well in their
Mhm.
playoff loss. But people are wondering, can Ryan Day coach well in big games? Because under Urban Meyer, the Ohio State Buckeyes football team played well in big games. So,
Mhm.
how big of a game do you believe this is going to be for head coach Ryan Day?
I think it's going to be big, and I would also say too they beat Notre Dame early on in the season last year. Now it of course it ended up being a pretty bad year for Notre Dame overall because they ended up
Yeah,
losing to Marshall and whatnot. But it is kind of crazy to think, Ryan Day is what 48-5, I believe, as a head coach in his whole entire career, and that Ohio State fans are calling for his head when he he wins over like 90% of his games.
yeah,
Um, but I do get it though. For Ohio State, there's one thing you for sure absolutely have to do. You have to beat Michigan every single year. The second most important thing is you have to contend for a national title. Now, I will say, as somebody that I've watched Ohio State from the outside quite a lot, there's been a saying that everybody has brought up. Michigan is built to beat Ohio State, but Ohio State is built to compete for national titles. And we saw that most evident last year. We even saw it the year before that.
yeah.
Ohio State, lost to Michigan pretty badly, but then they end up coming, extremely close, literally a missed field goal kick to, taking Georgia's spot in the title game against TCU. So I think for Buckeyes fans, while they're frustrated, they want to beat Michigan at the end of the day, especially once the college football playoffs expand. I would rather have a coach like Ryan Day able to lead me in the playoffs. If we lose to Michigan, that's not going to be as big of a deal. You're still going to pretty much have a guaranteed spot into the playoffs because more than likely, whoever wins the Big Ten and the runner up is going to be in the playoffs next year. Same with the SEC. And then depending on who's better, the ACC or the Big 12, more than likely that not only those champions, but the runners up of those divisions are also going to come into play.
Now, Notre Dame is led by quarterback Sam Hartman. Sam Hartman for the season, Tony, 13 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 1,061 passing yards, completing 72% of his passes. So, how important do you believe Hartman is going to be for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to come away with the win Saturday night in Notre Dame?
I think he's going to be extremely important. And I don't know if you've looked at his stats, but this is actually his 6th year in college football. He was a 5-year starter for Wake Forest all 5 years. He's thrown 110 career touchdowns on top of he's rushed for 17 touchdowns in his career at Wake Forest. Of course, he's thrown 13 touchdowns and ran for 2 here at Notre Dame. So
Yeah,
to me, Sam Hartman is quietly, to me, a Heisman finalist right behind Caleb Williams, just with how he's played. He's got Notre Dame to 4-0. He's looked absolutely fantastic. He's been comfortable. He's probably been one of the best quarterbacks Notre Dame has had of late in an extremely, extremely long time, and at least in my recent memory. So to me, he's going to be extremely vital in order to potentially go up against Ohio State. And I really do think because of his comfort in the system, because of how well he's been able to do so far, Notre Dame's ability to run the football, their good offensive line, and with
yeah.
Ohio State still struggling to kind of find their identity and their comfortability with moving their offense. I think Notre Dame honestly might come out with the win just purely because of Sam Hartman's experience and because of his comfortability with this offense.
Now, offensively, Notre Dame, they have nice skill position players in Jaden Thomas, in Tobias Merriweather,
Mhm.
also Rico Flores Jr. as well. So, who is the X factor in going, and who's going to be that number one target for Hartman in this Fighting Irish offense, Tony?
I say you caught me off guard on that one. I gotta I gotta look and see. Um, just looking at it, I think Audric S is it Estime, the running back. I
Yeah,
think I think he's going to be a pretty perennial part, and I say that he's got 63 carries, 521 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns so far on the season, and kind of the same thing I alluded to with Ohio State. If Kyle McCord struggles, he needs to be able to rely on that running game to potentially get him back. Get some kind of comfortability in there. Whereas with Notre Dame, he already knows he for sure has that. in Audric and his running back. Whereas I don't know if Kyle McCord feels that way with Travion Henderson. I don't know if Ryan Day feels that way with Travion Henderson to be able to feel comfortable with, okay, Kyle's struggling. We're going to give you the ball. We're going to play old school football, have our big offensive line control the chains, move the ball over. I don't know if Ohio State's going to be able to potentially do that as well as Notre Dame will.
Now, people are talking about Notre Dame and if they're able to win this game against Ohio State, Tony. They're saying this could be the biggest win in 30 years for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Do you believe that this game is of that significance? Do you believe if Notre Dame is able to pull off the upset and beat Ohio State tomorrow night, do you believe that this would be possibly their biggest win in 30 years?
Oh, I definitely do. And I say that because when you look back at the college football realignment, who's going to go where, and obviously the big fish that's basically left without essentially a home is Notre Dame. And, for how many years have we criticized Notre Dame? Because, yeah, they'll be, 12-0, 13-0, whatever their record may be. And then they're in the college football playoffs, and then they get absolutely obliterated by the Alabamas, by the Georgias, when it matters the most. So it really would be, because this would prove that, they can be independent, they can play whoever they want to play, and they can still be competitive. Now, albeit, I will say, if they do beat Ohio State, they'll have a little asterisk right next to that, because they'll say, well, it was Ohio State in a down year, new quarterback, new system. How much will they get that? It will still be a pretty significant win for Notre Dame. I mean, Ohio State is still the number 6 team in the nation right now. So, I mean, it's still going to be a pretty major win for Notre Dame, but there'll always be that little asterisk, that little parentheses right next to it, but not the best Ohio State team you could have faced.
Who wins Saturday night, Tony? Who you got, Notre Dame or Ohio State?
As somebody that has been born and raised in Indiana, I'm gonna have to stay loyal to the Fighting Irish. I'm gonna pick Notre Dame. I'm gonna pick them in a pretty close game. I think it honestly comes down to like a field goal kick for Notre Dame to walk off with the victory.
You got a score for me?
I'm gonna say it's a low scoring game. I'm gonna say it's 27-24 Notre Dame.
He's a college football analyst and the owner of the Inside the Who's Your Mind podcast. He is Tony Hollandsworth. Tony, I appreciate you joining me tonight on Wise Guys. Definitely want to speak with you more as the season goes along in college football. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on. As always, it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to the next time I come on, man.
Appreciate it, Tony. Have a good weekend.
You as well, man.
That is Tony Hollandsworth. Go and check out all his work on social media. Again, he is the owner of the Who's Your Mind podcast. So got a great, tremendous podcast, and he definitely knows his college football. He definitely knows what he's talking about, and does a great job covering college football.